Most people that will see this video are poorer than their parents and grandparents. Even though millennials have more education and access to information than their ancestors, many struggle to make ends meet. Our paychecks have more numbers, but they buy less stuff than they used to. But how did we end up in this situation? And what can we do to escape our bleak future? We've all heard analysts blame our problems on losing the work culture. But ironically, it's the same people who ruined our future that claim that millennials are poor by choice. According to data from Opportunity Insights, millennials and Generation Z earn more money than their parents. However, just because they have more dollars in their bank accounts doesn't mean they're wealthier. Even after years of growth in the US economy, not everyone has prospered. And now that the economy has stopped growing, things have gotten worse. Millennials, who are the generation born between 1981 and 1996, are on track to be the first generation not to surpass their parents in terms of job status and income. But to understand the wealth crisis we find ourselves in, we need to take a deeper look at the macroeconomic situation that has dragged us to this moment. Let's take a look at what researchers have discovered. According to Pew Research Center, millennials have faced significant challenges. They came of age when the economy tanked after the Great Recession and have struggled to survive from the first moment they entered the job market. Among Americans born in the late 1980s, only 44% had jobs with a higher socioeconomic status than their parents in their 30s. However, in the late 1930s, about 70% of Americans were better off than their family. Since then, the wealth rate has declined dramatically and has no plans to stop in the coming years. For example, only half of those born in 1984 earned more than their parents, compared to 92% of those born in 1940. In other words, it would not be an exaggeration to say that each generation has become poorer than the last. Moreover, we have evidence proving that our future expectations are worse. Every generation yearns to provide a better life for their families than they have had. But when prices rise and the economy stagnates, there's little hope for progress. The next thing we need to look at is inflation. Inflation is a phenomenon of the economy that will always be present. As long as the earth uses money, we will always have inflation. However, inflation is a variable of the economy that can be controlled. But when the world governments decide to print money to fix the mistakes they've caused, the consequences always end up catching up with us eventually. Currency printing is one of the main reasons why inflation rises. If the government prints more bills, our wages lose purchasing power. For that reason, your parents could buy a lot more things for $1,000 than they would be able to buy now in the present, and your children will be able to buy less stuff than you can in the present. One possible explanation for inflation is the law of scarcity. Like many other goods and services in the economy, demand for a scarce good causes its price to rise. It is for that reason that gold is more expensive than timber. You can plant more trees to have more timber, but you can't make gold appear out of thin air. This makes it an incredibly valuable commodity, not to mention that it has several practical uses. But what would happen if it were possible to print gold? If gold could be generated infinitely, everyone would have gold in their homes, which would detract from much of its value. The same logic applies to the currencies we use every day. When a government prints bills uncontrollably, money becomes less valuable, so prices rise accordingly. For that reason, every family has stories of grandparents who were able to buy a house in their 18 or 20s. But this phenomenon did not last forever. Each generation of bad governments meant we had to work harder to have less. However, the bad governments that destroyed the economy were not elected alone. They were a consequence of the bad decisions made by the older generations. Therefore, millennials are also to blame for their misfortunes and the ones that will affect their families in the future. We all know people who claim to hate politics, but how many people do you know who take the trouble not to be influenced by what others tell them? Are we really innocent victims of the crisis that destroyed our generation, or are we part of the problem? Today, we're in the age of technology and have tools that our parents could not even dream of. For example, we can find out what's happening on the other side of the world or solve any question on the internet in a matter of seconds. The problem is that this ease of information allows the powerful to control public opinion. Therefore, our opinions do not truly belong to us. They simply are a consequence of a disinformation campaign used by the media to make us vote for the candidates that pay them. Think about the algorithms of social networks. Where do you think their owners get their profits from? Despite this, the internet has enabled us to no longer rely on traditional media and has given us the power to better inform ourselves, do our own research, and draw our own conclusions. In the 21st century, it's easier than ever to be informed, yet many people choose not to do so. The problem of our generation is that it ignores the tools we have to defend ourselves from those who impoverish us. Instead, they waste time on social networks or watching TikToks, while taxes increase and inflation eats away at our salaries. Entertainment is designed to keep our minds asleep, in the same way the Romans used fights in the Colosseum to win the support of the people. That's why technology became the reason for our triumphs and failures. Nothing has changed in the last few centuries. We are the same humans, only that we just think we're smarter. But if we were that smart, we would never have found ourselves in this situation. And the worst part is that we have become an obedient class because the world's great powers ensure we fight among ourselves. If you like to watch TV or YouTube videos, you've probably seen hundreds of debates between men and women, Democrats and Republicans, blacks and whites, and Catholics versus atheists. So naturally, an ideological difference is the perfect excuse to start an argument. These debates are often carried over to the streets, forums, and social networks. But unfortunately, when someone proves to think differently than the masses, they're canceled. But who do you think benefits from our disputes? There is a reason why the rich have managed to maintain their wealth over time. Even if 1% of the population has half of the world's wealth, people don't question inequality because they're too busy arguing with their neighbors who are just as poor as they are. Fanaticisms exist to divide the working class and keep us from focusing on the politicians who steal our money. It's easier to govern a divided people than a united one. Ideological discussions are the perfect excuse to hide bad decisions made by companies and governments. They help create an imaginary enemy that does not really exist. The same logic can be applied to wars. Unfortunately, millennials are easy to manipulate, and studies show that they are also among the most indebted generations in history. If you ask a millennial how much money they have in their bank account, you'll find more people broke than there were a few generations ago. According to a survey conducted by Payments and Lending Club, about 54%. Today, our generation is bombarded with offers and discounts. Aggressive capitalism has led to our society becoming more consumerist than ever. As a result, millions of millennials have ended up becoming slaves to the banks, which force them to keep their lousy jobs to pay the interest on their debts. If they're laid off, they stand to lose everything. Another big problem facing members of this generation is student loans. College debt has crushed the ability to get ahead for many students who could have invested that money in their projects. But the modern economy is designed to keep us in debt at all times. In 1989, young families had an average educational debt of $1,415. But by 2016, that debt skyrocketed to $13,039. As of 2022, the average student loan debt reached $32,731. It usually takes the average American about 20 years to repay their student loans. Add in mortgages, insurance, and car loans, and you have the perfect formula for bankrupting a generation. The economic challenges we have faced over the past few decades have also contributed to the financial ruin of millions of families. Millennials have had to deal with major crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. But even if the crisis is over, the consequences of such large macroeconomic events often have lasting effects over time. Although COVID is no longer a problem, the economic and inflationary disasters caused by confinement could become the cause of the next recession. Crises are called crises for a reason. If they only took a year to disappear, no one would be so afraid of them. While COVID was raging, the current housing bubble has led to more millennials being unable to leave their homes. As a result, nearly 48% of young adults live with their parents today, which would have been unthinkable for our grandparents. The real tragedy is that many of these adults would like to live alone or with their partners. They're ashamed to share a roof with their family and long to be independent. But unfortunately, the current average cost of housing has made this dream more restless than ever. Over the past 4 decades, massive increases in housing prices have left more people with no choice but to rent or live with their parents. In the 1980s alone, the price of a home was $63,700, but in 1990, that figure rose to $123,900. By 2005, things spiraled out of control when sales prices reached $235,500, causing fewer families to afford a home. Today, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis estimates that the median home sale price is $428,700, a figure that should give us an idea as to why millennials are having trouble moving out on their own. Housing prices have risen faster than inflation, making saving to buy a home no longer as feasible as it once was. With the pandemic, many real estate projects had to be paused or interrupted. Housing construction was hampered by confinement and disruption in the supply chain, causing far fewer homes to be built than anticipated. Unfortunately, supply in the housing market was already tight. But with all these setbacks, the situation worsened immeasurably. Even without the effects of the pandemic, the U.S. market would not have had enough supply to meet the growing demand over the next few years. A recent study published by CNBC states a shortage of 5 million homes in the U.S. market, and builders are unable to bridge this gap. Therefore, the shortage of properties has caused real estate prices to continue to rise out of control. When it comes to building wealth, millennials also run into a lot of problems, as they generally have a much lower net worth than Generation X households. According to the latest surveys, only 47.9% of millennials are homeowners, and depending on the country, the gap between homeowners and non-owners is much wider. Most of our generation followed their parents' advice, hoping that the success formulas of the past would help them in the present, but the evidence shows that the results were not what they expected. In the past, having a college degree was a guarantee of success. That's why many workers and immigrants who managed to create wealth without any degree or higher education advised their children to study for a degree, and they thought that if they could succeed financially without a degree, their college-educated children would be able to conquer the world. However, there was a problem. Just as our parents told us to study, all the children of our generation received the same advice. Before we knew it, the job market became oversaturated with unemployed professionals. If you remember the example of inflation, when something is abundant, it loses its value. So why would you have to pay your lawyer too much if everyone was one? This is how college graduates went from being a rarity to becoming the traditional blue-collar workers of our time. Unfortunately, although educated workers generally make more money, many professionals are not as wealthy as their families promised. This has led to a generation frustrated with their results. But why do we have poor graduates? And where do they fail? You may not like what I'm about to tell you. We have evidence that education is a myth in achieving financial success. According to a Georgetown University Center report, about 16% of high school graduates earn more than workers with a bachelor's degree. Likewise, 28% of workers with an associate's degree earn more than half of workers with a bachelor's degree. And about 36% of workers with a bachelor's degree earn more than half of workers with a master's degree. Meanwhile, another study revealed that most entrepreneurs and small business owners don't even have a college degree. Thus, education is useful, but it's not the key to getting out of poverty. Despite all this bad news, some millennials have forever changed how the economy works. Successful millennials have learned to develop skills that allow them to differentiate themselves from the rest, and they know the importance of knowing how to sell themselves in the marketplace. Most of our parents and grandparents also understand the importance of improving in their fields. They were not after degrees. They were after skills and knowledge. You can have 5 degrees and not know anything, or have no degrees and be an expert at what you do. The key is practice and self-education. But today, we live in a completely different world than our parents and grandparents. As a result, how we communicate, relate, and make money is completely different from previous generations. So, if you follow the same well-worn paths to success, your fate is sealed. You can either study a career and hope to do better, or become better at what you do and learn to use digital media wisely. The information age makes learning new skills and enhancing your income-generating capabilities easier than ever. There are thousands of courses, articles, and videos full of valuable information available to everyone. It's fine to ask your family for advice, but learning how to identify opportunities in our world and educate yourself financially is better. That's what members of this generation need to become independent and improve their lives. We live in a society in debt and devastated by the decisions made by past governments. But even amidst all this chaos, there is still hope for those who refuse to give up. Millennials have become unique in the world. We're not our parents, but neither are we our children. We were not born in the pre-technology era, but we're no strangers to it either. Our generation has failed to be richer than our ancestors because it was born in the transition process between one era and the other. This transition has meant that many millennials have had trouble adapting and evolving in the face of change. Just as Uber ended up replacing cabs, technology is changing how we live and make money. A few years ago, no one would have imagined that the influencer profession would exist. But today, thousands of people earn 6 figures a year with their Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook accounts. If you ask your parents how to start a business, they'll recommend opening a store in your town. But if you ask a digital native, they'll advise you to open e-commerce. These little details make the difference when it comes to making money. A website is much cheaper than a traditional store. You don't have to pay rent, electricity, or water. You need a minimum investment to promote your prices and services to the rest. Even if you don't have money to buy products, you can start a dropshipping business and sell other companies' products on the internet. That's how easy it is to make money in the 21st century. Interestingly, these same millennials accused of being lazy and slackers were responsible for inventing much of the technology we enjoy every day. Thanks to their efforts, we have more opportunities than ever. The economy is totally different from what it was. The only way to survive in the modern world is by using all these advantages. Only in this way will you avoid sharing the fate of the most bankrupt generation in history. But what do you think? Do you think it's possible to live as our parents or grandparents did? Or are we already doomed? What advice would you give to a millennial who struggles to survive? We'll be reading you in the comments.